Hey, my name's Jonathan Clark. Welcome to the fourth and final part of my tutorial series about the Jamstix drum track creation software. Now, if you've missed the first three videos in this series and you'd like to go back and see them, because I kind of build on things, we're into the most advanced stuff right now. If you want to go back and see those, go to my website at djbolivia.ca/videos, and there's a list of all the videos so you can find the links there. But otherwise, let's keep going here. In this version, in this part of the tutorial series, I'm going to use Ableton Live as my host DAW for the software. Okay, I'm going to talk about things like the bar editor, VST automation, restore points, the options menu, and some miscellaneous stuff. Okay, now in my last video, I left out a couple things about the brain controls that I wish I would have mentioned, so I'm going to cover those right away. But in order to do that, we really have to get the software up and running. So I did cover in the installation video how to get Jamstix running in Ableton. The quick version of that, I won't rehash it all, is go into your options, preferences, and make sure that your plugins folder is pointed at the plugin. Okay, and there you go. Now, the other thing with Ableton, if you're not familiar with it, it's laid out a little bit differently than most other DAWs. I won't turn this into a huge Ableton lesson. I do have a bunch of other videos that I've produced about Ableton. Now, a lot of them are more related to DJing with Ableton, but they are good because if you haven't used Ableton before, they kind of presume that you're starting from the beginning, and so you'll learn a lot about the software that way. So even if you're not into DJing, if you're into production, you might still learn a bit from some of those videos. Anyway, I'll try to gloss over and just quickly point out a few things for people that aren't familiar with the software. This view right here, if we hide this front view is called Session View. It's laid out a little bit differently than your traditional DAW. Each of these little rectangles, and I could add tons more, I could add more tracks, more rectangles. Each of those is a spot for a clip, and a clip is either an audio file or a MIDI file or whatever. Okay, if I press tab, I get to this screen, which is called Arrangement View, and Arrangement View is basically laid out more like a traditional DAW. Okay, so you can see we've got the 4 different rows right now. We've got 2 MIDI tracks, 2 audio tracks at the moment, and you can add as many as you want of either type. Okay, so tab flips you back and forth between session and arrangement view. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to branch out here and just bear with me for 2 minutes. I'm just going to show you a couple things to make Ableton make a little bit more sense to you, maybe, if you're not used to using it. So to get Jamstix up and running, I'm in the plugins folder. I'm going to drag and drop it onto a MIDI track. Okay, there you go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a song quickly, and instead of using the quick start, I'm just going to build one. Intro, verse, chorus, ending. Okay, simple as that. And make sure you use capital letters. It won't take small letters. And I'm going to keep all the defaults, default style, default drummer, etc. I'm going to create the song. I'm going to speed up the tempo just to speed things up here a little bit, 136. And I'm going to go into Ableton and play it through, just so I have some performance data to work with. This is only an 11-bar song, so this will be quick. Okay, so now we have our song. And I taught you in an earlier video that you can drag and drop bars or clips or the full song. Sorry, parts. Bars or parts or the full song into your DAW. So we're going to do that, and we're going to do it with the parts. So instead of bringing the whole song in at once, I'm going to bring in the 4 parts one at a time separately. And you don't have to have them actually in any particular order here with Ableton. You can do all sorts of odd stuff. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these into arrangement view. And the way to do that is to click on a clip, keep the mouse button held down, hit your tab key to get it to arrangement view, and then drag it and let go. So sort of a drag and drop as you pull through the from session to arrangement. Okay, and I'm doing these in logical order. Now I could have just dragged these into the arrangement view from the start, but I wanted you to see session view. So let's get a better sense for the whole thing. Now, so this track, Jamstix 1, if I play it, yeah, you can hear performance data. Now let's say I move this clip from track 1 to track 2. Okay, so Jamstix 1, track 1 has Jamstix, track 2 is a MIDI track with no instrument. Oh, that's odd. If we're playing through here and this MIDI's on a track with no instrument, why is it making a noise? It doesn't make sense. Okay, the reason is because as you're playing through this way, this section right here is actually what's creating the noise, because Jamstix in the background is doing a performance. And so it looks like this MIDI is playing. And in fact, if you move over and look at the indicators, you'll see the MIDI is playing until we get out of the section. But it's actually the stuff up in track 1 that's playing. So if I turn track 1 off, see, nothing's happening. My MIDI is playing, but there's no instrument creating any noise. Okay, so let's do this. Let's open up our drums. Okay, and I'm going to drag and drop this kit Core 606, and I'm going to drag it onto this track. All right, my kit just showed up. Now let's see what happens. Okay, that's awesome. So my MIDI from Jamstix is now in the editor, and it's now playing through a completely different kit, an Ableton kit, instead of through the Jamstix kit. So if I wanted to, I could move everything down here. I could also just move my kit up onto this channel. Now, Ableton has a hot swap button here, so I am going to, let's see, we'll put a 4-bar loop on, and I'm just going to play for a minute, and this button, once it turns orange, I can hot swap by double-clicking a different instrument, okay? Okay, so now I've got the 707 kit, double-click on this, 808 kit, 909 kit, and so on. Now the neat thing is, you don't even have to restrict yourself to drum kits. MIDI notes go up and down a piano keyboard, so I could do, let's put a fifths sweep. Okay, that's interesting. Synth leads, let's try one of these. Synth keys. Okay, so these other instruments other than drum kits probably aren't what we're looking for if we're trying to create a drum track. But I'm just showing you how neat it is that you can create a drum performance and use that MIDI for some sort of pattern stuff and get some really, really neat stuff. And that's not limited to Ableton. Any of your other DAWs will have all kinds of traditional instruments, like VSTIs, other than just drums, and you can do all sorts of neat stuff with that. Okay? Anyway, now that we've done that, sorry for the little diversion, but I thought I'd show you that. So the two things that I wanted to talk to you about that I forgot in the last video, brain controls. Now you can see some of these brain controls are white, some of these are orange. The reason for this is the white ones are associated with the style, so these white ones are all part of 8th Rock. The orange ones are all associated with your current drummer, which in this case is Jamstix. So if I were to, so remember what these four are: kick, snare, hi-hat, Q, and hi-hat E. If I were to go in and load style and pick a different style, those 4 white ones should change, yet the orange ones will stay consistent because the orange ones are associated with the drummer. Okay? And they did. They rearranged their layout a little bit, but it's the same orange controls, different style controls. Same thing with the drummer. Let's say that I don't want these controls, I don't want Jamstix. I want a different drummer. It's called player here. Let's bring Chad in and let's see what happens to our orange controls. Okay, they all changed. Okay, so play with that. You're going to get, as you switch from drummer to drummer and to style, you're not just going to get different default values on the controls, you're going to get different controls entirely. Now, I also said that if you click on the white or orange label for any of these elements, you're going to get a little menu here. I forgot there's a second menu. Now, if you okay, the entire box here is called an element. So Tom's is the element. Within the element, I've got 2 separate controls. 2 controls in this one control in this, 1 control in that. Okay, if I do a right click within the element, somewhere, right now nothing's happening, but if I do it on top of a control, I bring up a menu specifically for that one control. Okay, and this is the MIDI assignment menu for controllers, for an external controller. So if I know that, let's say, in the redirection element, under the amount, I want to set that to a control on my controller over here, and let's say I know it's fader number 5, I could just click on this 5, but sometimes it's hard to know what all your numbers of your controls are. You can also usually just move the control, the fader, the slider, the knob, the jog wheel, whatever you're assigning it to. You can move it. Jamstix will pick it up and understand that you're trying to assign this control to be controlled by the control on the controller. That's a lot of controls. I know that's kind of crazy. Okay. Anyway, so MIDI assignment menu, I forgot to mention, that's useful. And the fact that the actual controls elements vary from drummer to drummer and style to style. Now that I've said that, let's get started properly on the main part of this last tutorial, and we'll begin with the bar editor. Alright, so we've already talked about the bar editor briefly. Let's take a closer look. Okay, so the resolution of the bar editor, 16 notes. You can see 16 cells across. We can see 6 vertical rows. So the top 4 are the 4 limbs of the drummer, and the next 2 are the hands of the percussionist. So left hand, right hand, drummer, left foot, drummer, left percussionist hand, right percussionist hand. Okay? So all of the notes generated by the brain are shown in this grid, and they're in one of 3 layers. Okay, so right now we're on the groove layer. Okay, I can also click to see the accent layer, not much in this one, and the fill layer. Okay, a little bit more. And this is all for bar 6 that we currently have highlighted. All 3 layers belong to bar 6. So even though they're displayed separately, they play simultaneously. So if you wanted to, you could program the kick and the snare yourself in the groove, and then let the brain handle the accents and the fills. That's fine. Now, what happens when the brain merges the 3 layers to play them if there's a conflict? Okay, that can happen. Now, say for instance that on a certain position of the bar with a certain hand, there's a note played in 2 different layers simultaneously. And you might think, well, why could this happen? Like, why would the brain do this? Isn't the brain composing it? Well, I'll explain this more in a few minutes, but basically each of the 3 layers is composed independently, and then as it's merged, the brain starts applying all the rules about priority of notes and stuff like that. That's how it works. Okay? So in this example, let's look at 2 conflicting notes. So bar 6, groove layer, we'll look at the right hand, and we'll look at beat 4. And so you can see there was a note there in the groove layer. Switch to the accent layer, right hand, beat 4, nothing, so there's no conflict yet. fill, right hand, beat 4, there's a note there. So that note and hand has a conflict between the fill layer and the groove layer, and then the brain is going to figure out one of the two of the notes gets priority, and so it's only going to play one of the two. And you can change the priority of the individual notes to affect which one gets chosen. And so in this case, the one in the fill layer does not have an X through it, so it got played. The one in the groove layer has an X through it, that did not get played. Okay? Now, so anyway, within this, within the bar editor, if you double click on a cell that's occupied, watch what happens. Note disappears. Okay? If you double click on an unoccupied cell, a note's created. Okay? And the note that's created is the most common sound for that limb, or the last sound you selected for that limb in this current editing session. Now, if you want to edit a note, there are two things you can do. If you double click, if you single click on the note, a white line appears around the entire note. And then I can start playing with these 4 knobs over here. Now, you remember in the mixer, there were 3 knobs, and these 3 knobs affected the mixer as a whole. Not the same way in the bar editor. These 4 knobs are set individually for every single position on this grid. So, for example, on this note, if I lower this control and then go over to this one, see how my thing changes as I flip back and forth between the 2 notes? That's because these controls belong to this note. Now these controls belong to this note. Okay, so you can change them. So basically, yeah, the 4 knobs are independent for every single note, and I guess let's go through them. So the first one, VEL, is velocity, and watch the red line in the cell as I move that up and down. Hopefully you can see that on YouTube. Okay, so it's changing. Anyway, that's the velocity of the note. PRI is the priority of the note. TIM is the timing of the note, and the timing knob moves the notes ahead of or behind the beat by intervals of up to 47 seconds. 47 milliseconds. Okay, look over my status line. See, I'm at negative 47 right now, and I'm at 47 now. Okay. Now, and timing to the left, the negative number is ahead of the beat, and for the priority, you'll see negative numbers too, and higher priority is the negative numbers to the left, and that kind of seems counterintuitive. I don't know an easy way to explain this, but I think the rationale is basically you're moving, you could say that you're moving it ahead of the grid, so it'll get played ahead of a conflicting note that's almost at the same time on the same thing, and obviously because of the limb controls, you can't play 2 things at once with the same hand or limb. So the first one gets to play. Anyway, and then the final thing, the hat. If I move this up and down, look at my hi-hat right there. Opening and closing. Okay, so that's the amount of open or close on the hi-hat, the opening amount of the cymbals of the hi-hat. Okay? Yeah, so I guess with that conflict thing, yeah, it would seem more intuitive if the knob to the right, the priority knob to the right, higher number, has more priority, but as the manual says, to the left. And that got me thinking, how does that work? Why does a number to the left, a lower negative number, have a higher priority? And I think it's because it's the same way as the timing is adjusted. You know, move the note to the left a tiny bit, it happens before another hit, and then the brain says, well, you can't do those 2 things that quickly apart. Okay, so all the stuff that I just described applies when you left-click on a note. Now, what happens if you right-click? A context menu is going to show up, but you have to be careful. This one is highlighted right now. If I right-click over here, what it's actually doing is showing the context menu for the note that's selected, this one, okay? So if I want to look at the context menu for this, select it first, then right-click. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. So in this context menu, you can do stuff like cutting and copying, deleting, change the sound, change the style, the hit style, change the timing mode, change the shuffle, okay? So changing the sound is pretty intuitive. Let's go on to a note in the feet, okay? My only option here is another kick drum, okay? Let's go on to this hi-hat and look at changing the sound. Okay, my options are kick or hi-hat. Basically, it's not going to give you an option of changing the sound to something that's not possible. Like you're not gonna have the option of using a ride cymbal if you're trying to change the sound on a foot. Okay, now you can do that actually in another way because you can use redirection. But you know, this is the realism section of the kit. Okay, so the hit style. Hit style is pretty basic too, and so single is a single hit, double is a double stroke, and bounce is 3 hits, so it's kind of like a 30-second triplet of decreasing power, like the natural bounce of a drumstick. Okay, timing modes here in the context menu are a musical time offset by either 24th, 32nd, or 48th note. Okay, this makes sense to any professional drummer or to a music student. And then down below we have the shuffle option. So that affects the timing of the note by shuffling the timing on just that one note instead of the entire bar. Okay. Now outside of the context menu for each note, we have some stuff up here. So learn and locked, these both toggle, and blue, bright blue, means they're on. Now if you lock an individual note, so right now I've got this one highlighted, selected. If I lock the note, it is going to have a, it's the same concept as locking a whole bar, but it only applies to the one note. And what happens is you see this red line at the top. Watch when I turn this on and off, red line goes away. And, okay, so this note over here has a red line on it, that one's locked. This one's locked. This one was locked. Now it's gone. All the other notes are unlocked. Now if you want to lock the entire bar altogether, of course it's this lock icon over on the right, but you can lock individual notes. And what's neat, let's say I'm going to manually add a note, so I'm going to double click right here. Okay, it automatically comes on as locked when you create that note. And that default setting is, I guess it's because, you know, it assumes that if you took the effort to put the note there, you want it there. So you can unlock it if you want. I already mentioned the red cross on the note means the brain attempted to generate it, but then suppressed it during the last playthrough. And so this was probably due to a limb conflict, maybe, or limb timing rules. So you can move the note, the mouse over the note here, and then take a look at the status line. It says fill is playing. So the reason why that note got blocked out is because of the fill. And you might see some other messages like priority override by crash 1 or something like that. Now the learn button up here, if the learn button's turned on, the brain's going to listen to incoming MIDI performance data and interpret it and enter it into the bar editor. So if you're comfortable playing a MIDI controller, like a keyboard controller or an e-drum kit, this can be useful. If you're doing this, Jamstix pays attention to the quantize MIDI input setting over here in the options menu, and it also pays attention to locked items. Now, if you look closely at these notes on the editor, the icons can communicate a lot of info. So I already said the vertical red line on the left indicates velocity. Vertical red line across the top indicates the note's locked. Can't see it here, but there's another one. If you see a little red dot in the lower right corner of a hit, that means it's a double hit. Kind of odd, single red dot, double hit. And the manual says it's on the left side, but it's not, it's on the right. And there's also the possibility that you'll see 2 dots in the lower right, and that means it's a bounce hit. And again, the manual says it's on the left, but it's not. If there's a black triangle on the left side of your icon, which I don't have here, it means that that note is shuffled, and it's either because it's individually shuffled from this menu, or because the whole part is shuffled. And what else? Yeah, I guess the icon, if you're on a hi-hat, this will show you the openness. Okay, now what else? The bar menu. I've already showed you this in another section, so, and it's pretty self-explanatory. I'll skip that, we won't do it again. Okay, I know, if you click on any of these things over on the left side, you're going to get your limb menu, which is, it's pretty simple, self-explanatory. Now, same thing across the top. Each of these 16 divisions, click on it, and you will get a beat division menu, I guess. I don't know what it's called with. Anyway, so you can play with things like adding cymbal wash, adding snare roll, playing with the syncopation of the beat, applying the changes to the whole bar or whatever. Lets you play with the groove weights, basically. So maybe we could call it a groove weight menu. Now there's other options to the right of the compose button. The compose button itself, you can click on it if you don't want to change any of the brain settings, but you want to edit, you want to listen to an alternative performance. If auto is turned on, bright blue, changing the brain controls up here can lead to an immediate recomposition sometimes. The bar, if the bar is highlighted, recomposition only regenerates the current bar. Otherwise, if it's off, like right now, the entire part is regenerated. This little disk icon, this saves a restore point, so it's like System Restore in Windows. And if you want to recover a saved restore point, go over up into your song menu, load restore point. Okay. And then finally the trash can, if you click on that, the current aspect, the current layer of the bar, everything is wiped out of there and it's marked as composed, so the brain will not regenerate those notes unless you specifically do a recompose. Okay, so let's talk about style and drummer models. Now, I've talked several times already about the style and the drummer and how they affect the performance. And I've also talked about how different notes can have different priorities, and a note with a higher priority will get played instead of a note with a lower priority. So, but you might wonder, if the brain is generating all this stuff at once, why do you even have to have a priority? Like, you know, I kind of wondered that. And there shouldn't be any conflicts in the first place if the brain is doing all this. But, see, the reason is, the brain doesn't do all this composition as a unified whole. It's got the two different models, the style and the drummer, and these are kind of two independent engines that the brain oversees. Okay, so the style model basically affects almost all of the groove and does a little bit of has a little bit of effect on the accent layer and the fill layer. But basically the style, you know, it's like a drummer learns a style when they're growing up, when they're learning to drum, like swing eighths or something like that. It's just a very basic thing. But later on, it's the personality of the drummer that adds all the frills and stuff. Okay? So the style model takes care of almost the entire groove layer and does a little bit in the aspect and the fill layer. Once that layer, once those things are calculated, then the drummer model is applied over top. And so the drummer model really focuses on the accents and focuses on the fills and adds more stuff. And occasionally, some of the drummers will add a few notes to the groove layer, but not very often. They mostly just do the accent and the fills. And so the problem is, once you've had the style model generate a bunch of stuff and the drummer model generate a bunch of stuff, it's possible that one of the two models put something in one position on one of the three layers, and then the other of the two models put a hit that conflicts with it in a different layer. Okay? And that's when the brain has to resolve the issue before it generates the final performance. So at that point, the brain looks at what the style model has created between the 3 layers and looks at what the drummer model has created between the 3 layers, and then it resolves all the conflicts. And it does that by checking limb realism, like limb conflicts. Can a drummer move fast enough? And it also looks at the priority between the 2 things, and that's how it finally generates the one performance in the 3 separate layers, which sounds realistic. So if you want to use the Jamstix bar editor to create a MIDI part, instead of doing it in your host DAW, you can just pick silent drummer and silent style, okay, and then go into your bar menu and do lock manually created events, okay? And so if you want, after you've created your handcrafted groove, you can choose a different drummer to interpret that style, but you might want to export your performance or create a restore point first, just in case you don't like the results. Okay, so let's take a look at the options menu. A bunch of these are pretty straightforward, so I won't cover them all. Basically, blue is on, light blue is on, otherwise it's off, gray. Debug log should be left off. Enable limb controls. If you turn that off, you can have a drummer with more than 4 limbs. Auto edit sounds. So if you mouse over a sound down here, when this is turned on, you'll hear it. But if you turn it off, you don't hear it. Sync when stopped, allow time signature changes, stereo outputs, we've talked a bunch about this stuff already, MIDI. Reverse hi-hat controller. So usually for hi-hats, if your pedal pressure MIDI controller value is 127, it's a closed hat, and if it's 0, it's an open hat. And so what this does is it just reverses the 2 of those, so open would be 127 and closed would be 0. Never down mix, basically overrides your down mix switch in the mixer, which I mentioned earlier, down here. Song looping, straightforward compact user interface, that's a smaller interface. Yamaha pitch convention for Yamaha stuff. Okay, voice reduction. The voice reduction is related to CPU loading. And so look this up in the manual if you're having problems, like if your audio is making clicking noises or something like that. I haven't had this happen yet, so it may not be an issue. That may be more of an issue from back years and years ago when computers were a lot slower. Audio outputs, stereo. Okay, this is the number of stereo outputs sent to the host, and the default right here you can see is 8, but it ranges from 1 to 17, except for Pro Tools is limited to 1 right now. So if you change this, you have to restart Jamstix. You may have to reboot your entire host just to be safe. Bar offset, visual or actual. These are useful if the Jamstix transport bar and the beat numbers aren't aligned with those in your host. Now it could be that they're different just because of the because you've been playing with stuff. So if you play it, maybe they come back into sync. And then finally, autosave, expressed in minutes, 15, 30, 45, 60. You can turn it off, and the default is to save on exit. Okay, let's go into some last miscellaneous things that I haven't covered yet. First, one thing I did forget. With the drummers, with the limb control, the brain thinks about how realistically a human drummer could play. And that includes information about how fast the drummer can move his or her arm from one piece of the kit to the next. Okay, so it focuses on distance, timing, stuff like that. But also, the brain realizes that a real drummer can have a real fast burst of energy when you're playing faster than normal, but the drummer can't really sustain that for more than a few seconds. So after a brief burst, you kind of slow down. So that's what these controls in options are. Arm speed, how fast the drummer, how fast his or her arm moves, delay, foot delay, burst time, that's that burst of energy that they have, how long it takes for them to recover after a burst before they can, you know, go at a good speed again, burst factor, stuff like that. That's all related to the limb control. Okay, now the next thing, VST automation. So basically, there's hundreds of controls here in Jamstix. The odd thing is, because of limitation in the VST standard, you can only automate 3 things directly from within your host, which could be really frustrating. You can automate the power level, you can automate the reduction, and you can automate the global timing slider. Now, there is a workaround. All of these hundreds of controls can be controlled by an external controller. And so if you do that, most of the DAWs will let you automate the envelopes for all the controls on the controller. So it's kind of like you're going in and doing it through the back door. So it's a smart workaround. It's a little unconventional, but it works. Okay, so that's VST automation. Status lights. Okay, so down here you can see these status lights. The MIDI in and out are obvious. They flash when MIDI is being sent or received. The audio in LED only lights up when data is coming into Jamstix from audio mate. And finally, if you ever start to hear clicking noises in your audio, like I said, I haven't, look to see if this LOD percentage thing starts glowing bright red. And the more red it is, the more overload you have. So if so, go up to your options menu and either increase the voice reduction or increase the LOD pre-buffer. Right there. Okay. If your song uses time signature changes, I said earlier this wasn't a problem, but it actually is. You are sort of slave to the host, but unfortunately it's not that simple because VST doesn't really allow for, it's not good with time signature changes. So you really should set each part manually just to be certain. Okay, so to do that, before it was grayed out, you have to have allow time signature changes to be turned on here in your options, and then you can change stuff. Now you do want to make sure that it matches any time signature changes that are happening in your host. So Jamstix does slave to your host in terms of the tempo and stuff. It's just the time signature changes that I didn't say that right before. You do have to manually set the time signature changes, okay? So, yeah, I guess that's pretty straightforward. It's kind of annoying. And you might have a problem if you have a time signature change in the middle of a part. You're going to have a problem because you have to change it for each part as a whole. So the only way around that is to call your part 2 different items and then have a different time signature for each. You can't have the whole thing as being like the first half 4/4 and the second half 3/4. You have to turn that into a 4/4 part by itself and a 3/4 part by itself. Okay, now what about jamming with audio? The audio jam, obviously you have to start off by setting Jamstix up in the project as a VSTI and click this audio jam button. Now you also have to have audio mate as an insert effect on an audio track being monitored. Okay, so I'm going to flip to session view for a second. Let's say one of these 2 audio tracks, number 3, I'm going to bring in audio from my guitar on audio 3. What I have to do is go to my plugins, drag and drop audio mate onto this track. And so audio mate then does the monitoring. Okay, and you may have to enable input monitoring or input echo depending on what host you use, but you should now see the audio in light flickering as you're playing your instrument as the host is playing. And the MIDI jam works exactly the same way. Okay, restore points is the last thing. Up to 10 restore points are allowed. After that, it starts overwriting earlier restore points, which is probably not a problem. And Jamstix is smart enough to know not, it's based on fixed time intervals, but it will not write your restore point while the host is playing while you're doing a performance, just in case that bogs your system down for a second and messes up your performance. So it waits until your performance is stopped, the host has stopped playing, and then it does your restore point save. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, you made it. I think this is the end of the series. By now, hopefully you've realized just how powerful Jamstix is. Just immensely powerful, and hopefully you're a little bit more comfortable with it. So if you're a beginner or intermediate music producer, obviously this is just outstanding how much easier it makes things. Even if you're a professional that's used to hand coding your MIDI, there's so many options of speeding up your workflow here. Just unbelievable stuff. So if you liked what you've seen with Jamstix, tell other people about it, tell other producers about it, because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of knowledge out there about Jamstix compared to some other systems, which is unfortunate. So what do you do next too? If you're a beginner or intermediate producer and you're looking to get better, some things I'd recommend that you do is, if you're not a drummer, get some books about drumming and just learn a little bit more about the whole process, what's involved with the different kits, different manufacturers, all sorts of stuff, styles, playing styles, things like that. Experiment with Jamstix. You've seen how easy it is to play with stuff. You can't really hurt anything, so build some songs with it. Build some drum tracks for different songs. Best way to learn, by doing. And then also, if you really want to take it to the next level, study mixing. So learn how to take a performance, get it into your DAW, split that MIDI into different channels, and then, once you've got it on different channels, learn how you can play with not just the volumes, but you can play with plugin effects. Like you can play with compression, you can play with reverb, equalization, volume, balance all the things out, and you can really have professional sounding results once you learn to play with that stuff a little bit. Don't overdo effects. That's a lot of people do at the start, but just some minor tweaking can make things sound a little bit better. Okay, I've said I'm going to try and produce 2 full tracks with this. That'll happen hopefully within the next month or so. I do have some work for paying clients that I've got to deal with first, but once I have those done, I'll put the full project files, full Ableton, Pro Tools, whatever, online. You can download them, you can play with them, you can adjust them, you can remix them, whatever you want to do. Okay, so look for those. Once I've got them done, I'll put the links in the YouTube descriptions, and I will put the links on my videos page, djbolivia.ca/videos. Okay, so thanks for watching, thanks for sharing this. Thanks for subscribing on YouTube and following me on Twitter, SoundCloud, whatever. Good luck with your music production. Cheers.